धन्यवाद जनाऊँची विश्व निडम आ ऑर्गेनाइजिंग कमिटी ऑर्गेनाइजर्स माने मते निमंत्रण करिसंती ए विद्युत प्रभांक सेंटिनरी पई गुटी ट्रिब्यूट दबा पई एबे मु इंग्रजी रे कहिबी आई एम वेरी ग्रेटफुल टू विश्व निडम which epitomizes the term used by Gurudev Tagore, the world in a nest. And I have chosen the topic for myself, the many universes of Bidyut Prabha Devi. As Professor Anantakumar Giri had said, modernity talks in binary terms, either this or that, and the kind of a modernity that we have access to, it really brings about simultaneity of many concepts and many terms which are considered to be polar apart. So advisedly, I am using the title Many Universes of Bidyut Prabha. In the course of my talk, I do hope that it will become very clear as to why I have used the title Many Universes of Bidyut Prabha Devi. Now, let me begin with an anecdote. On the 12th of July, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes. On the 12th of July, the state of Odisha and the cultural community, the literary poetic community, paid homage. The 12th of July happened to be the birth anniversary of Bidyut Prabha Devi. She was born in her uncle's house in Jankadi in a night of storm and lightning, and therefore her father, the great writer and compiler N.C. Das, named her as Bidyut Prabha. And in fact, her life, metaphorically and literally, was like a lightning. She lived up to the age of 51, and we know that Kuntala Kumari, her predecessor, lived up to the age of 39. So within 51, the remarkable progress that she made as a homemaker, as a poet, as a supporter of her husband, in the field of literature and poetry, and later on, spreading the message of the mother and Sri Aurobindo in different parts of Odisha, and she was popularly called Bidyupa. I refer to the program, the celebration on the 12th of July, in fact, the whole rest of the year till next year. I think the state and the nation will be celebrating Bidyut Prabha's birth anniversary. After the Honorable Education Minister spoke in the company of Dr. Pratibha Ray and the Education Minister of the state, the minister was besieged by media persons, and I stood behind quietly and in a self-effaced manner. And one gentleman came to me and said, "Can I say something to you?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "I am unknown to you, I am a stranger. But may I say that you are extremely fortunate to be born as a son of Bidyut Prabha Devi." I said, "Yes, I am acutely conscious about this privilege and this great honor, just as I am deeply honored to be sitting before you and to offer my reflections about the life and work and achievements of Bidyut Prabha Devi." We know from a spiritual point of view that many things that happen in life are not accidents. They're the result of divine dispensation. I think it must be the result of the divine dispensation that I was born as a son of Bidyut Prabha Devi. And I have tried to make progress in the academic literary world. And I have explored many dimensions aside from the work on my mother, Srimati Bidyut Prabha Devi. We need to have a larger canvas, a larger context, in order to understand the significance of an individual writer. I might go back to 1990-91 when I was on a Fulbright scholarship, postdoctoral scholarship at Texas Austin. And I happened to visit Dr. Meena Alexander, who was teaching at that time. She was very well known as a diasporic writer, Indian English diasporic writer. She was in New York and happened to stay there with her family. And she shared with me the manuscript, the typescript of the work which was published by Feminist Press. It was called Women Writing in India from the earlier period to the modern age. This was edited by Suji Taru and K. Lalita. And she said, your mother was a well-known poet of Odisha. You might be interested to see this work, which is seeing the light of day soon. I took a quick look at the typescript, and I found that the Odia section was very poorly represented. Apart from Kuntala Kumari and one other writer, there was no mention of anyone else, least of all, Bidyut Prabha Devi. So I came back to Hyderabad and I asked Suji Taru as to why certain regional sections were so poorly represented. And I said somebody who is well grounded in Odia literature should have been given the task to unearth, not something which exists in the public domain, but I think it requires painstaking effort, archival effort, to go and to collect those texts which have been lost. So she said, half seriously, half jokingly, well, Sachi, somebody like you should be doing it. I was at that time, I had completed my work on D.H. Lawrence. I had been to the United States to look at the Lawrence's American connection, and I was going in the direction of postcolonialism. But fortunately, postcolonialism gave me access to regional writing and translation. So I decided that should not become a footnote to Western scholarship. I must do something original and think globally and act locally. I understood the message of that. To have exposure to Western scholarship, which is avant-garde, which has so much to offer to us. But these theoretical insights will be of great significance when we apply those theories in our own context itself. And I decided to apply it in the context of Odia literature. I worked on it, and later on, they appeared in the form of a book, Lost Tradition, Early Women's Writing in Odisha, 1898 to 1950. And that was published by Sage. And recently, last year, on 2024, year before last, Manohar has brought out the second edition. An Odia original appeared by Sahitya Academy, and the second edition has come out last year. Bismuta Parampara, Odia Sahitya Nari Pratibha. This was the genesis in New York City, as well as my work under the UGC's Career Award. It took more than the duration of the Career Award, and I spent nearly 10 years to work on it. And I found that several of these writers who were there in my book were not discussed at all in Odisha, like Sarla Devi, for example, one of the most powerful and path-breaking writer, reformer, and social revolutionary. Similarly, Kuntala Kumari was not sufficiently well known. She was known as a kind of a legend, but the corpus of her work was not sufficiently known. And there was an entire tradition of the women writers. And unfortunately, our own tradition, literary tradition, has not been sufficiently highlighted, as it has been in the sister cultures like Bengal, Kerala, Maharashtra, and others. So there was a lot of outcome of this kind of a work. So I began to work on Sarla Devi, on Sarla Das, Kuntala Kumari, and of course, Bidyut Prabha Devi. And therefore, the work which I have done during the lifetime of my father, the two volumes of collected works of Bidyut Prabha Devi, Granthavali, were brought out by a friend's publisher. And I decided that while her poems were taught in the schools until recently, the poetry-loving readers of Odisha in particular need to be given access to all the best of Bidyut Prabha's poetry. And so this is what I have produced. And this has had a very good circulation. Bidyut Prabha ka Shrestha Kavita. And I also realized that one of the important and vital sections of our poetry was Sisu Kavita, children's poetry. Now, children's poetry as a genre is not sufficiently appreciated by canonical critics. But I do believe that children's poetry has as important a special place in the canon, literary poetical canon of a poet. And since today many of these children do not read their original Oriya and the Indian languages, I thought that we should give access to some of the best children's poetry of Bidyut Prabha Devi. So I produced this Poems for Children, which was brought out by Rupantar. This was by this was by Priyadarshi Patnaik, who treats me like an elder brother. He's a professor of English at IIT Kharagpur, Humanities and Social Sciences Department. And thanks to Rupantar, which is an imprint of Siksha Sandhan, this has been brought out. I don't know about the circulation, but I do believe that these poems should be circulated widely among the children who unfortunately do not have access to their own mother tongue. So what I should do now, within the time that has been given to me, roughly 1 hour or 15 minutes, after that, hopefully we'll have question answer session. I want to begin by saying the first part I will talk about briefly about the context in which I am writing. I am presenting this talk. And the life of Bidyut Prabha, briefly. After that, the major works of Bidyut Prabha. The three phases that I divide Bidyut Prabha's life and work into. And in the final section, I shall highlight the major achievements of Bidyut Prabha Devi and the many dimensions of Bidyut Prabha Devi. In my book, Lost Tradition, Early Women's Writing in Odisha and Vismunta Parampara, based on the archival work which I have done, I have argued that poets like Reba Rai, Kuntala Kumari Sabat, Haripriya Devi, Devavati Devi, Nirmala Devi, Tulasi Das, Brahmotri Mohanty, among others, have also written. Now, neither these writers are taught at the university level or at the college level in Odisha. And this is a result of, this is a matter of great, profound regret that Reba Rai, Kuntala Kumari Sabat, Haripriya Devi, Bidyut Prabha, Devavati Devi, Nirmala Devi, Tulasi Das, Brahmoti Mohanty are very important and they have been completely sidelined and forgotten. I do believe that one of the major objectives that critics and writers should have is to restore these writers and the poets to the domain that in which they richly deserve to belong. These writers are very important because these writers have to be seen in contrast of what was very popular during their time, contrary to the kind of a vision that they offered about the emancipation of women and consciousness raising for both women and women, men and women. And they were not highly educated, but they were self-taught. They had access to best of the writings in Bengal, like Rabindranath Tagore and others also. And they wrote in contrast to what was very popular during that time, namely the conduct book tradition or the advice for women. That patriarchy wanted women to really inculcate the values, internalize the values of how to be a good homemaker, how to be servile, how to be subordinate, and how to acknowledge the male supremacy, both in life, within home and outside. So I think this was a very powerful kind of a gesture that these writers like Reba Rai, Bidyut Prabha, Kuntala Kumari made. Although they did not have the opportunity to play a role in public domain, unlike the only exception was Sarla Devi, who had studied up to class 7, and Kuntala Kumari, who was quite well educated in the medical science, and she traveled. Barring these two, others were largely confined to their home and they wrote. But what they wrote and their own powerful vision which really did not deny motherhood and family life, but also try to say that along with family life and motherhood and parenthood, women have a larger role to play in society in terms of polity, culture, ideology, etc. This is something very, very unique. So they are writing in contrast to the conduct book tradition that Judith Walsh is talking about. And in Oriya, Jagabandhu Singh had written series of these books which were given as a gift at the time of the marriage. How to be a good wife, how to be a good mother. But there is no book about how to be a good husband, how to be a good father. Those books are not there. So women are really given the larger responsibility, the sole responsibility to be an ideal person, ideal wife, ideal mother, ideal sister, etc. So I think quite clearly patriarchy believes in a kind of a double standard there. And the writers that I'm talking about from the ideological point of view, which has been recognized in recent times by Chandra Talpade Mohanty and Madhu Kishwar and others also, they were pioneering far ahead of their times. So Bidyut Prabha was born on 12th July 1926 in Jinkadi village, as I said. She was second of the four sisters. If you think of the sisters who are very outstanding, we are reminded of the three daughters of the editor of Utkal Sahitya, Vishwanath Kara, Narmada, Pratibha, and Suprabha. And Suprabha Kar happened to be the teacher of Bidyut Prabha when she was a student in Ravenshaw Girls' School. And Ravenshaw Girls' School, many people may not know, especially those who are outside the state, that it was a cradle for female education in the state itself. So Nandini Satpathy was a contemporary of Bidyut Prabha. Nirupama Rath, who was a spouse of Gangadhar Rath, and a very well-known doctor of her own time, the sister of Benapani Mohanty, she was a senior, and so also Basanta Patnaik, the author of this very powerful novel, which brought her a lot of name and fame. So Nirupama Rath, Basanta Patnaik, the author of Ahmedabad, they were the contemporaries of Bidyut Prabha Devi. She had studied at the primary level in the Jhola Sai, very close to the house, their own house in Bampi Sai, near Raja Bagicha in Cuttack. But they also spent a lot of time in their own village in Natra, in the undivided Cuttack district. Now it is called Kendrapada district. She received a lot of support and influence. All the four were very fine. They had potential for writing. So Basanti and Bidyut Prabha, they wrote Sabita together, 1948. And after that, there were other two sisters also, Swarna Prabha Devi and Punya Prabha Devi. Swarna Prabha Devi, we know there is a very famous poem called Bhasi Ja Re Kagaz Danga Bhasi Ja. 1968, when the Paradip port was inaugurated, the then Chief Minister Biju Patnaik had announced that there should be he invited the poets to write a poem commemorating the opening of the port. Swarna Prabha Devi, the younger sister of Bidyut Prabha, had written this poem called Bhasi Ja Re Kagaz Danga Bhasi Ja. She was a talented poet herself. And then Punya Prabha Devi, the youngest one, who passed away very recently. All the four were very good poets and they learned. But due to circumstances, the first two could not really, first Basanti and Swarna Prabha Devi could not write as much as Bidyut Prabha Devi and Punya Prabha Devi. And today we are discussing the works of Bidyut Prabha Devi. And in the recent days, many people knew about Punya Prabha Devi. She lived in Vizag. And through Facebook, she interacted with many poets of Odisha and elsewhere. So Bidyut Prabha Devi's career came to an end when she had completed class 9. And her father, N.C. Das, said he was conservative minded, but he was also paradoxically interested in poetry and mentored his daughter to be a good poet. but to stay within the boundary of the family and the home. And he said, Asujang Pasya. You're not going to a sabha and samiti, you're not going to a radio station, you're not going to a poetry gathering. Because respectable members of the Corona caste, the intellectual class, must remain within the four walls, and they might get married, and after marriage, you bring up your family, then you can write. So this is the manner in which Bidyut Prabha wrote. She had studied up to class 9. But I have access to many of the notebooks that she wrote. And the notebooks she is writing about synonyms and antonyms, those notebooks had been brought to our own home and they were preserved by my father, and today they are there with me. So later on, if it is possible, the photocopies and the scanned copies of the notebook should be made available to people as to how Bidyut Prabha had really studied rigorously at home, both in Cuttack as well as in Natra, in the village. Another important thing happened. N.C. Das encouraged all the writers of the time, best of the writers and the poets of the time, like Krishna Chandrakar, Radhamohan Godnaik, Mahadev Mansingh, and others also to come and to mentor his daughter at home. And also when books were published, Savita, the foreword was written by Shashi Bhushan Rai, the son of Radhanath Rai, iconic writers of Odisha. And Shashi Bhushan Rai, towards the end of his life, he wrote this foreword regarding Bidyut Prabha and Basanti, and hailing the achievements of both, the initial achievements and the pioneering work of both the sisters. This is generally not known in the literary history of Odisha because, as I said, women's writing has been completely marginalized. But of course, feminist press and Norton Anthology in America, they are bringing up the lost, the marginalized works of the women. George Eliot and others have been very well known, Emily Dickinson, but many others were not known. Similarly, here in the context of Odisha, you will see the truth of what I am saying, because the writings of Reba Rai, Kuntala Kumari, and of Bidyut Prabha and Harapriya Devi, etc., are not known. So she learned. So when people say that she was an unlettered genius, many people erroneously say that she was an unlettered genius. She was inspired and she wrote. When I did this kind of a research, I found out that it is not correct, because the notebooks are testimony to the fact that she had studied hard and she learned prosody. In one of the works of one of the issues of Kumkum, which was published in 1948, and I had access to this kind of a home collection by Brajanath Rath in Baleswar. And incidentally, Brajanath Rath was a young man when Bidyut Prabha stayed in Baleswar for 3 years. So I found out that Kumkum, which was edited by Debo Mahapatra and Nuru Mahapatra in Litho Press, was brought out from Bombay. There was an article that she wrote on prosody, and at the end of the article, in the footnote, she says, Bijdraw Visesa Drastabhya. Those who would like to know more about the Oriya prosody can read Rabindranath Tagore and others also. So you can see that she had read Rabindranath Tagore, Sharat Chandra, Bankim Chandra, etc. So she may not have had higher qualification and the degrees, but that doesn't mean that the people, like many writers of her own time, she was very well read. She was very well read in many, more than one language, including Bengali. So she wrote, and then of course, there were others also. Bidyut Prabha is often compared to the legendary Kuntala Kumari of Odisha. In 1968, her poetry collection Sanchayana won the Odisha Sahitya Academy Award, and earlier she had received Jahakujiye. Her work Jahakujiye had received the Best Children's Award by the Government of India. So you can see, then she has returned, others also. Look, let me cite some of the major works of Bidyut Prabha Devi. Began from 1940 onward, elder sister Basanti. Basanti was published, I stand corrected, Sabita 1944. And then then followed Marichika 1948, Utkal Saraswata Pratibha 1946, Kanakanjali 1948, Bihayasi 1949, Bandhanika 1950, followed by Sopnadipa 1951, Jhara Seuli 1952, Jahakujia 1953, and Sanchayana 1955. The last one was published at the initiative of her father because he said that our own jati, our own community doesn't know how to respect the woman poet. So in my own lifetime, the collected works should be brought out in the form of Sanchayana. After motherhood, Bidyut Prabha is drawn to the composition of children's poetry. Most of such acclaimed poetry appeared in Mo Penkali Bojaide 1960, Gacha Patara 1961, Kahinki Tume 1963, Podutha Hasi Hasi Godutha 1966. Many of these poems for children come in the form of tales and narratives that children are fond of in all cultures. The titles are a riveting medley. The Hungry Bear, The Clever Quack, Who is the Real Fool, Then What Came to Pass, Mathuri Das, The Monkey and the Man, The Fly Expert, Fountain Babu, Brother Madhya, Rock Me As You Can, Naughty Children, The Tree and the Creeper, The Crying Baby, Crying and Wailing, Calm and Composed, The Notes, Saregama, Words and Tales, Soft and Silky, Rice and Rice Water, The Ideal Child, and many other tantalizing poems and songs brought her wide acclaim. These titles are, of course, not the original titles. The titles are translated from Odia. For the knowledge of those who do not understand Odia, let me translate and then I will try to read one or two poems originally in Odia. So, conversation between the tree and the creeper. Very interesting. Tree. Sister creeper, what are you doing? Why, like a worm on the ground, are you groveling? This is translated by Priyadarshi Das and myself. Creeper. I'm frightened of your great height. How will I go up? Dear brother, give your hand. I will clutch it and jump. Tree. My arms are all stretched upward. I have but one foot. Have you gone blind in the day? Can't you see this root? The rhyme, the rhythm, the sound value, and the unique cadence in the original Odia are hard to capture. However, the English renderings give us the flavor of the poems mentioned above. Her collection called Jahakujie won the Best Prize for Children's Literature in 1955. At the same time, Bidyut Prabha excelled in writing number of poems that are strikingly feminist in character. Rebellious in tone, some of them attempt to harmonize the conflicting drives involving the reality of domestic drudgery versus the desire for creativity. The poem Pratighat typifies a female poetic persona caught in the vortex of domestic drudgery. When I read out this poem in the Cambridge seminar, which was organized by British Council, two of the women participants who came from Scandinavia and told me at the Cambridge seminar, Sachi, your mother spoke to us. So this is about Pratighat. Let me read it originally in Odia, and then I will read it in English. Look at the rhyme scheme. A daughter-in-law at home. She's got more than, she has four children, as Bidyut Prabha had. How is she going to really combine her domestic drudgery with the great desire for writing poetry? And this is not only true characteristic for her own self, but this seems to be typical and epitomizes the life of many literary women who also had families. And understand, when I read it out in English, you will see the dialectics which exist in the poem. And it's beautifully written with very colloquial language and original use of expressions. ତେଣେ ପିଠଉ ହେଉଛି ଦରବଟା ଆଲୋ କୁଆଡ଼େ ଗଲା କି ବଡ଼ ବୋହୂ ଏଣେ ଘର ଗୋଟାକର ବାର ଛଟା ଆଜି ରାତି ହବା ଯାଏ ପଡ଼ିଥାଉ mother-in-law. And she says, ମୋର ଲେଖିଦେଇଛି କି ଜୀବନଟା ବିକି ଦେବା ପାଇଁ ନୀତି ଏଇ ଘରେ ଖାଲି କାମ 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 ଦିନ ରାତି ଆଉ କିଛି ନାହିଁ କ'ଣ ଜୀବନରେ ଏବେ ନାରୀ ଜନ୍ମଟା ରଡ଼ନିଆ, ତହିଁ ଗୃହ ଜଞ୍ଜାଳ କିରାସିନୀ, ଯେବେ କଲମ ଧଇଲି ଶୁଣ ଗାଳି, ତାକୁ ଛାଡ଼ିଲେ ବି ହୁଏ ଖିନି ଖିନି। ଲେଖା ସବୁ ନିଶା ତହୁ ବଡ଼ ନିଶା, ତାର ସୁଆଦ ଚାଖିଛି ଯିଏ ଥରେ, ସେ କି ସହଜରେ ପାରେ ଏଡ଼ି, ଯେତେ ବାଧା ଆସୁ ପଛେ ଜୀବନରେ। ବଡ଼ ଛଟପଟ ସାରା ଜୀବନଟା, ବାର ଛିଟିକୁଟି କାମ ପ୍ରାଣ ଖାଏ, ସଦା ରୋଗ ଜଞ୍ଜାଳ ଅନଟନ, ତହିଁ କବିତାକୁ କାହିଁ ବେଳ ପାଏ। ଆଜି ପୁଅ ଦେହ କାଲି ଝିଅ ପେଟ, ଓଷା ବ୍ରତ ବହୁ ବାର ମାସ, କାଳି କଲମର ଯେବେ ନୁହେଁ ବେଟ, ବୃଥା ଭାବନାର ବାରବାଟୀ ଚାଷ। ଏତ ନ ଯୋଗାଇ ଆଉ ଦାନା କନା, ତେଣୁ ଉତ୍ସୁକ ହେବେ ପରିଜନ, ଟିକେ ଆଶ୍ୱାସ ଲାଗି ଜୀବନରେ, ବାରେ ମଣି ମୁଁ ସବୁ ପ୍ରିୟ ଧନ। ଆଜି ଯିଏ ପଛେ ମତେ ଯାହା କହୁ, ମୁଁ ତ ନଈ ସୁଅ ପରି ବୋହିଯିବି, ଏଇ ରସ ଟିକେ ପାଇଁ ଯେତେ ଝଡ଼, ସୁଖେ ହସି ହସି ସବୁ ଖଇଯିବି। ସେ ମୋ ସବୁ ବେଦନାର ପ୍ରଲୋପନ, ସେ ମୋ ସବୁ ଦୁଃଖର ଗୌରବ, ସେ ଯେ ରିକ୍ତ ନିଦାଘ ବନନୀର, ନବ ମେଘ ମଲ୍ଲାର କଳରବ। ମୁଁ ଯେ ବଖାଣି ନପାରେ ଯେତେ ଖୁସି, ସିଏ ଢାଳି ଦିଏ ମୋର ବୁକୁ ତଳେ, ଏତ ଏକ ବତାସୀ ମୁହଁର ଶିଖା ପରି, ମୋର କବିତା ପ୍ରଦୀପ ଆଜି ଜଳେ। The conflict between domestic drudgery versus the desire for creativity. Let me now read it out in English for those who do not understand Odia. But I think reading original poem in Odia is very, very important. I'll just read out some stanzas. The grinding is half done. Where are you, eldest daughter-in-law? Unmindful of chores that lie pile up until nightfall. The response is a powerful, defined one, is a distinctly patriarchal setup. And the person says, poetic person says, am I a bonded laborer? Am I to be sold daily only for this house? Work, work, and more work? From morning till night, tell me, is there nothing else to life? The truth of force in the dialectics comes towards the middle of the poem through a set of poetic affirmations. Let people say what they like, I shall go on flowing. Like the mighty river, I shall cross whatever come my way with a smile forever on my lips. For nothing can surpass the lure of poetry, says the poetic persona in a series of lyrical utterances. Writing, she says, is the balm for all my pain. It's the glory of my sorrow. Writing is rain-soaked woods. It's the music of cloudbursts during the month of Shravana. I wish I could speak of the joy that gathers in my heart like a flame in the mouth of a storm, my poetry a luminous lamp. I have made an attempt to capture the original cadence and the sound value. I don't know to what extent I have succeeded, but I I think the gist of the poem, the significance of the poem would be communicated in a certain significant manner through this translation. Poems like Pratigat are not an exception in depicting a powerful female voice. So very often Bidyut Prabha has been typecast as a romantic poet, as a poet of nature, of the village, Pallikavi, like Nanda Kishore Bal. But I have seen that she's really very different from any of these the predecessors that she's compared with. She's very different from Nanda Kishore Bal. Even when she's depicting the beauty of nature, beauty of the village life, she's very different. You can see that. And I will show how she is very different. Romantic poems, of course, there are many romantic poems. And if you look at her uniqueness that I will indicate towards the end, let me just hint at this stage itself. She wrote the poetry of the rural life, rural Odisha, and she wrote romantic poems also after her marriage. And the entire process of a woman in Odisha getting married, coming to the village, being, sort of perform. There are performances also. There are ritualistic performances of welcoming her, and then of course the bridal night, and then of course, and contact with the village women, etc. is very, very, very well depicted in a meticulous and in a wonderful and in a very moving manner. She has talked about these experiences, which will be also shared, which will be also acknowledged by other women, including in today's Odisha itself. So Pratigat and others are also very, very important. You can see that. So Bidyut Prabha's poetry can be divided into three parts. One is, of course, the early period when she's writing patriotic poetry, like Odisha and Konarak, and then writers like Kuntala Kumari and others also, Gangadhar Meher. The patriotic phase, Oriya patriotism, Oriya sub-nationalism. Then she's writing about Bapuji, Gandhiji, and then she's writing Utkal Saraswata Pratibha. I mean, one rarely comes across a collection like Utkal Saraswata Pratibha. When she's writing, I mean, today we are talking about Oriya identity and Asmita, which dates back to 1936. 1st April 1936, Odisha was formed as a separate state, a separate province. So Utkal Saraswata Pratibha, which was prescribed text at a certain time, is talking about all the great, Sikh, great men, statesmen, writers, poets, essayists, man of action, and reformers. She's talking about them in Utkal Saraswata Pratibha. The first stage. The second stage is, of course, and the first stage also comprises the poetry of rural life, her own village, etc., which are extremely moving and very, very beautiful. And if you look at the rhyme and the rhythm scheme also, they're very extremely, lyrical. And some of these poems were prescribed texts like Pallimaya, Kadyotika, are also as prescribed text. And until recently, the students of Odisha and the schools, they read Chotoru Boda and Kadyotika and Pallimaya, etc. They read in the school level. The second phase comprises the phase of romanticism, of married love, which I said is absolutely unique. And earlier to her, no woman poet had written so candidly about married love. And Kuntala Kumari wrote about love and romantic love in an oblique manner, very often, sublimating the human love into a kind of a divine love. Bidyut Prabha is talking about divine love separately, but she does talk about very honestly and candidly about the bridal night and relationship with the husband, romantic terms and very powerfully. And this is where she has scored, because you can see that she had an original voice and pioneering voice in this case. Then the third stage was the stage when she's writing devotional poetry. She comes in contact with your Buntu and the mother and the ashram in Pondicherry, and she wrote series of devotional, collections like Jyotishika and Pushpanjali, and some of them were recited in the Sri Aurobindo study centers. And during this final stage, she had also traveled far and wide in Odisha, and this is a stage when she was known as Bidyut Prabha. She taught asanas, she put on shorts, she taught asanas to all the women, and she stood very powerfully for female education. That women need to free themselves from the drudgery of domestic life, and while family is welcome, and the children need to be really brought up with right values, but it is important, she argued, for the women to have higher education and to take part in the public domain. At this stage, I noticed that this is 9:15, and we began at about 8:30. So we are doing fine in terms of time management. I'll be very happy. And Dr. Anandagiri said that we must have a dialogue. So every talk, every deliberation, reflection must also have a dialogue. So I shall throw it open subsequently. But in the final stage, of course, I will read out some poems. But before that, let me highlight very briefly the many universes of Bidyut Prabha Devi. And what are the major contours of her own poetry and poetic achievements? What are the life values that she had? And how do they intersect with her own poetic and literary values and literary credo? First, it was not poetry for poetry's sake, as stated by Oscar Wilde and Walter Pater and others. It's not just for the aesthetic experience, but poetry for the sake of society, for humanity, for mankind, for the growth of the inner spiritual life, and spiritual evolution of mankind. This is the first thing that I would say. If you look at the entire gamut of our own poetry, the corpus of poetry, you find that poetry for society's sake, poetry for humanity's sake, and poetry finally for the growth of the spirit and inner life. This, of course, was very powerfully manifest and realized towards the end, but in seed forms, I shall argue that they were there from the beginning itself. Second, I shall suggest that social vision and spiritual vision go together and are deeply interconnected, and they're compatible. Unlike the present ideological thinking, which says that social political vision do not go with spirituality. And I'm very happy that critics and theorists and social critics like Dr. Anantakumar Giri bring the spiritual vision and the social vision together. Spirituality and politics and political vision, understanding politics in the widest sense of the term. By politics, we understand the search for justice, the search for equality, the search for equity. If that is how it is understood, the political vision, the social vision, and spiritual vision go together hand in hand in Bidyut Prabha Devi. I shall read out some poems. Third, Bidyut Prabha's attitude towards poetry and life evolve over time, no doubt, but the later ideas were there earlier also in the seed form. I shall read out some of those poems to suggest how those later ideas were already there in the seed form in the earlier poems. Let me read out 2 or 3 poems at this stage to make my point. I'll read out some extracts from Bilasi Kavi, which says that it is not just for the sake of writing poetry and to be interested in the aesthetic experience that one is writing poetry, but one is writing poetry to capture the angst of the suffering and the predicament of those who are dispossessed. And then, of course, the second idea that it is not important to search for individual salvation. That is important, but the importance, significance, and the pivotal importance of the earthly life that you find in Sri Aurobindo's idea. It is not monastic order, search for monastic order, and to go to the mountaintop and to free oneself from life and the complexity and the problems of life, some form of an escapism that Sri Aurobindo is decrying. Sri Aurobindo says that the life has to be really divinized. Yoga, he said, is to divinize life. And that is the uniqueness of Sri Aurobindo's ideas. The earthly life is very important. The transformation of the earthly life. Marriage is not to be really discouraged, but marriage and relationship and all aspects of life. Therefore, he wrote, All Life is Yoga. Synthesis of Yoga and Yasodhanda Gita talk about all life. The need to transform their life, not to reject life in favor of some kind of an escapism and some kind of a monastic order and the life of an anchorite. He rejects those, and he is talking about transformation of life with the development of a higher faculty called the supermind. But before that also, I think yoga has to really embrace the totality and complexity of life. So at this stage, let me just read out 2 poems of the earlier period, which really confirm what I am saying, which validate what I am saying. 2 poems I'll read out. The early poem, as I was saying, earthly life is important in itself. The phenomenal existence is important in itself. It has an absolute importance. It doesn't have a relative importance. And how to accept the earthly life and to change it, and how not to really go for salvation, individual salvation. An early poem, and we can see the resonance that it has in the later works of Sri Aurobindo and the later devotional poetry that she wrote. In seed form, she's evolving, but the later ideas are already there in the seed form. Lode nai sarga. Lode nai mu sargavumi hasai jai agratumi abratumi chandra tara surujo puruna sei parachitale aruna rate chapala dhare bichade nai murujo. Lode nai mu urbosira susamacharu nartakire jane giti udara ପଲ୍ଲବିତ ବକୁଳ ବନେ କୋକିଳ ବଧୁ ଅଳସ ଗାନେ ଚିତ୍ତ ନାହିଁ ମୋହର. So stanza after stanza, she's talking about the heavenly riches that one has heard about. Urvashi, Menaka, and the great riches and the opulence of heavenly life. लोड़े ନାହିଁ ମୁଁ କଳନାଦିନୀ ନୃତ୍ୟଶୀଳା ମନ୍ଦକିନୀ ଜଗତ ରୂପା ଧରଣୀ ଚାହେ ମୁଁ ନୀଳ ଶୈଳ ତଳେ ହାରୁଣୀ ସମ ଧରଣୀ ତଳେ ଶୋଭଇ ଯେଉଁ ଝରଣା. I do not seek for the heavenly riches. I seek for the stream. I search, I yearn for the beauty of nature. I yearn for the flow of the water. ଧରାରେ ଚାହିଁ ଭୋଦେଇ ରାସ ଯେ ମୁଦେ ମତେ କଅଁଳ ଘାସ ଅଧୀର ଶୋଭା ରଚନେ. So the great manifested beauty of nature that I'm really interested in. And I'm not interested in the heavenly beauty, heavenly riches, and the promise of the everlasting happiness that we have heard about in when we pass away from the earth to heaven. And then finally you can see that लोडेना तिले सेदस मुई डालेन मात स्नेहस जोई बजुर प्रेम अरग छाड़िए मधु विश्व घर किलुड़ा अबा से तेणे मोर ए जे मो सात सरग. The earth itself is a heaven for me. I seek no flight from the earth. Because of suffering, because of misery, I should not really seek a flight from the earthly life. The earthly life has so much, the earth itself has so much to offer us. The beauty of nature, the flow of the streams, the presence of the daughter-in-law, and the home life and nature, abundance of nature. That is something that, I really like to cherish. Then in Kolikata Chori, you can see that she is talking about the plight of the coolie in Calcutta and who has left home because of poverty and penury, and she's there. ଆରେ କଲିକତା କୁଲି ଦିନେ ଦିନେ ଆଜି ଓଡ଼ିଆ ତୋହର ଛୁଟିରେ କୁଟିରେ ନ ଜଳେ ଚୁଲି ପରବାସ ଆଇ ମୂଲିଆ ଭାଇ ପଛକୁ ଟିକିଏ ଅନା କଙ୍କାଳ ସାର ପରିବାର ତୋର ପେଟେ ବି ଦିଏ କନା. So the Calcutta-based coolie from Odisha has gone and he's trying to earn his livelihood because there is so much of acute poverty. And ki sapana dekhi, ki mohore padi, rahichu gaଁ भूली. And in what circumstances, what dream have you seen? As the result of which you have left the village and left your family and you have gone to earn your livelihood itself in Calcutta. Now, the poems are also not like Palikavi's poems because, like a sonnet, for the most part of the poem, you might find that she's really depicting nature. But like in a sonnet, the last two lines really illuminate the entire, the bulk of the poem itself. That is what you find in Elizabethan sonnet and Petrarchan sonnet. You find Elizabethan sonnet, the last two lines. Like a short story, the last paragraph of the story, like O. Henry, etc., and D.H. Lawrence and Maupassant, you find that the last part of the story, in a striking manner, in a remarkable manner, really bring home to us the message of the story and the message of the poem. Let me read this short poem called Chotore Bada, which is also prescribed, and many children have read this poem, but let me read. And let me also draw your attention to the last two lines. छोट छोट फूल छोट छोट श्यामा घस टिकी ओठ धारे नाही गुलु गुलु हास छोट तराटीर मिଳିमिଛି ଆଖିଠାରେ ଓଦା ଆଖି ତଳେ ସରୁ ସରୁ ଲୁହଗାର ଛୋଟ ପ୍ରଦୀପର ସ୍ନିଗ୍ଧ ସମିତ ଜ୍ୟୋତି କଅଁଳ କୁସୁମେ ଛୋଟ ହିମକଳା ପୋତି ପ୍ରଜାପତି ଦେହ ଟୋପି ଟୋପି ଛୋଟ ଚିତା ଛୋଟ ଧୂଳିକଣା ଛୋଟିଆ ବରଷା ଛିଟା. And remarkably, the last two lines. ଆଖି କହେ ଯାକୁ ସୃଷ୍ଟିର ଅତି ସାନ ମନ ପାଇଁ ତହି ବିରାଟର ସନ୍ଧାନ. So the myriad of examples that she is taking about the smallness in the butterfly, for example, the spots, and then the grass, the dewdrops on the small dewdrops on the grass. So there is a whole listing of the beautifully lyrically listing of the small items which were there in nature. And then at the end she says that if you look at the small, akitaki jako, whatever we talk about as small, mono pai johi biratara sandhana, we can see the greatness of the unknown in the small itself. This is another example that you can see. As Sri Aurobindo says, nothing, there is nothing small in God's lies. Let there be nothing in thine. And he devotes as much importance to the smallest water as to the vast ocean itself. Smallest water body as to the vast ocean itself. So you can see this parallel, and the way Bidyut Prabha is envisioning life is nothing small, nothing trivial, nothing insignificant. We have to have the vision to discover the greatness of the larger whole in the smallest thing itself. I've read out Pratighat, and this is another stanza from the love poem when the beloved, possibly the husband, has come home during the weekend and is departing for the workplace. And how beautifully the persona, the wife, the beloved is writing about this. Priyabani. ଭୋର ସପନେ ଚମକ ଲାଗିଲା ତୁମେ ଯିବ ପରବାସ ମଉଳି ପଡ଼ିଲା ପାଂଶୁ ଅଧରେ ସହସା କରୁଣ ହାସ ନୟନରୁ ଝରି ଅଶ୍ରୁର ଧାର କପଳ ରଚିଲା କଜଳ ଗାର କହିଲା ତୁରିତେ ବିଦାୟ ଗୋଗ ନାହିଁ ଆଉ ଅବକାଶ ଭୋର ସପନେ ଚମକ ଲାଗିଲା ତୁମେ ଯେବେ ପରବାସ କର୍ମର କଟୁ ତାଗିତା ତମକୁ ଗଲା ଯେବେ ଆଗମନ ପାରିଲ କି ଶୁଣି ବିଳସ କେଶନ ବାହୁଲିର ମନ ଯୌବନ ମଦିର ସ୍ନେହର ମଧୁର ସୁଆଦ ସୁମରି ତିଲକେ ନଚଳେଇ ପାଥ ଫୁଲଟି ପରାଏ ଫୁଟି ଝରିଗଲା ଦିଦିନ ପିରତି ରାସ ଭୋର ସପନେ ଚମକ ଲାଗିଲା ତୁମ ଯିବ ପରବାସ. Let me finally sum up what I was saying. The many universes that we are talking about, it is not poetry for the sake of poetry, but poetry for the sake of mankind, poetry for the sake of humanity, and poetry above all for the sake of the spirit and for the sake of inner life. And this search for inner life, this aspiration for the inner life is not divorce from trying to find a kind of a heavenly existence on earth itself, in order otherwise to embrace the totality of life that she's talking about. So it's not individual salvation, but the salvation of the race and the salvation of mankind that Buddha is talking about and Sri Aurobindo is also talking about. So it's not only poetry of nature, but poetry and discovering the significance of a higher self, more than animism, more than nature worship, but the discovery of Godhead in nature itself that she is talking about. So whatever she is writing, whether it's about the beauty of nature, beauty of the village life, beauty of the village rituals, she's all the time trying to find the greatness and significance of a higher truth in this. And thirdly, as I said, another important dimension of our universe is that she is talking about the poetry of married love. So married love, romantic love, and the physical relationship is also not being rejected. The physical relationship and the married relationship, romantic relationship is embraced and transformed for a higher kind of a pursuit in life. That's what she's talking about. And then you do not find dualism. You find a totality. You find that many contradictions are being brought together, seeming contradictions are being brought together into a larger kind of a harmony. So the evolution of Bidyut Prabha's poetry from early poetry of patriotism to romantic love and to search for the divine, they are there. I mean, for the sake of convenience, we divide them. But as I have argued, I hope I have succeeded in stating that they are overlapping, that there. While there is an evolution, there is also the involution because those seed ideas are all there in Chotoru Bodo, Bilasi Kabi, etc. It is not for aesthetic life, and poetry is not just a pastime, but poetry has to capture the angst of human beings. So that is what she's saying, that the angst of human beings, the suffering of mankind has to be really acknowledged by the poet. So finally, one might say that the social vision and the political vision, understanding politics in the widest sense, and the spiritual vision as given by Swami Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, and Sri Aurobindo are brought together. Thank you very much. I'll be very happy to take any questions and comments. This has really turned out to be a very fine dialogue, and it surpass any of the best seminars that one can think of at the state or the national level. Excellent listening and then fine response also. I just want to show you some photograph. This is a photograph of me, my father, and myself. Goder gote kacho pos jaitila. I heard from my parents, and look at me. And my look at my mother. She never wore chappals. In the initial phases, because she said she really liked the touch of the earth, the grass. You can see my father has taken up, has been promoted. He's put on the shoes, and I think I don't have any chappal, and my mother doesn't have any chappal. So my mother's desire in the initial phase not to have chappal footwear is because she wanted to be close to the earth. And in her house, and people ask me about my life with her, and I was the eldest son. And in our house in Unit 2, there was a guava tree. Very often, my mother, there were two rooms inside, and she chose not to go to a bigger quarters. Even when my father got promotion and became an assistant financial advisor and financial advisor, she chose to be there, and very often there was a folding cot, and she was to use that folding cot just beneath the guava tree and sleep, sometimes at night, just beneath the guava tree. You can see that. And once my sister said, this is a question that I'm also turning to the last question. Indomitable courage, how did she really manage life? So ବଡ଼ ଭଉଣୀ ମିନତି ଅପା ତାଙ୍କ ନାଁ ବି ମିନତି ଅପା କହିଲେ ବହୁତ କୁଞ୍ଚ କରିକି ପିନ୍ଧୁନୁ. You can see the sari that she is wearing, the style. Till the very end, she was wearing this kind of a style. You can see from the photograph also. The same style, Odia style, current style. ବହୁତ କୁଞ୍ଚ କରିକି ପିନ୍ଧୁନୁ. ମୋ ମା କହିଲେ, ବୋଉ କହିଲେ, ମୁଁ କୁଞ୍ଚ କରିକି ନ ପିନ୍ଧିଲେ କ'ଣ ମୋତେ ଜାଣିପାରିବେନି ବିଦ୍ୟୁତ ପ୍ରଭା ଦେବୀ ଭଳି? Would they not recognize me? If only you wear sari in a modern fashion. Look at the same basic simplicity that she had. And Dr. Pratibha Ray said, and looking at the picture, she said, there's so much of nirbhikata and there's so much of humility, modesty. Nirbhika. Many nirbhika people are also very arrogant, very boastful. And she said rightly how much of nirbhikata that she has got and how much of modesty she has got. The two traits that very often traditionally do not go together. Thank you, Mr. Mishra, Mr. Babu, for your own compliments. You refer to Chittabai, and one of the articles that Chittabai Chittaranjan Das had written, and she was a great admirer of my mother. And my mother really loved to give him chuda chokta, traditionally prepared, and very, very fond of my mother. I understand that many of his conversation he has talked about Bidyut Prabha Devi. And one of the essays that finds place in my work, edited work called Anya Dushtira Bidyut Prabha, how others are looking at her, Radhaman Godnaik, Mahadharman Singh, Krishna Chandra Kara, and also Kalinji Chana Panigrai, they've all written forward to my mother's collection of poems. And in one of the works, I think it's very, very important that Chittavai is asking this question, Chittaranjan Das. Why do people really call her Nari Kavi, woman poet? Why do they call her Nari Kavi? Because he says very correctly, provocatively, insightfully, he says, nobody calls male poets Purusha Kavi. Nobody calls Purusha Kavi male poets. So poetry is a preserve of men, and therefore if somebody is an aberration, you call her Nari Kavi. So he's so right. Why are we calling her Nari Kavi? We should call her a Kavi. But because women had not got a voice and they were marginalized, today we talk about women's writing. And for the right reason, because, how do they position themselves in a patriarchal context? That will be my answer. Ultimately, today we are saying that actors, we're not saying actresses, because they have found their own place. Another thing that I would say is that when Bidyut Prabha passed away in 1977 at the age of 51, some people went and told my grandmother, Rekha Devi, who herself was a great admirer of poetry, and she said, "ଏ ଥିଲାବେଳେ ତ ତାକୁ ପଚାରିଲେନି ମରିଗଲା ପରେ ତାକୁ କ'ଣ ପଚାରୁଛନ୍ତି ଆଉ ଫୁଲ ସବୁ ଦଉଛନ୍ତି." When she was alive, she was unsung, she was neglected. What is the point in really, singing praise of her when she's passed away? And this is true because our own jati have not really recognized greatness. Not just poetry, but greatness in individuals. And very often we, reserve all the compliments that we have got, all the complimentary words at the time of the obituary. So I think my grandmother had a point that when somebody is alive, you should really recognize her own genius. Like when I did the work and I found out that Reba Rai, one of the earliest voices, and she's written Nirobe, which is all about all the desire of patriarchy to silence. Main chup rahungi, the iconic film of Meena Kumari. And she said, I found out that in 1956, some people discovered her because she was really preparing some kind of a gossip arutile. Gobarer gossip arutile in Jajpur. People had completely forgotten about Sadhu Charan Rai and Reba Rai. And until my work also, nobody knew about Reba Rai. She had written on Utkal Sahitya. That's another point. How is it important to really recognize genius and talent when they are alive, and so that we can learn physically from them? I'm so happy that many people have learned from Chittaranjan Das called Chittabai. So we haven't had many traditions of mentorship as we have had. I wish and I hope sincerely that we have greater amount of mentorship also. People talked about personal life. It is very important. I should tell you about personal life. And how did it impact me? See, when I was growing up, obviously I did not have the benefit of scholarship that I have, and with the benefit of hindsight, I am able to really realize and see significance of many things. As I said, by 1996 itself, when I began the work, I really began to understand because I've had exposure to British and American literature about Mary Wollstonecraft, Virginia Woolf, Dorothy Wordsworth, many others also. Ellen Showalter and Kate Millett and read. And when I read, I understood the value because I think as we go forward, we begin to understand many things that we have taken for granted. And this is something that had happened in my case. I was aware that I was the son of a great genius called Bidyut Prabha Devi. But the real significance I understood later on after she passed away, when I began to read, because it's on the basis of reading and you sort of expand your own intellectual horizons and consciousness that you begin to appreciate many things later on. So that is the value of an essay called Tradition and Individual Talent. So how do you rediscover talent, tradition? You discover tradition on the basis of your own upgradation of your own knowledge. And you rediscover tradition. Vidyut Devi, my mother, was a humanist. It was rightly said by Basanti Madam. Because she never discriminated between her children and other children. I've very rarely come across mothers, women, who really look at you as a son. In my mother's case, I have seen in practical terms that if she had prepared some food for, and I would say that, can I have this food? And she would say, ଏଇଟା ଅନ୍ୟ ଜଣଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ଉଦ୍ଦିଷ୍ଟ ହେଇଛି ଆଉ ଜଣଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ଉଦ୍ଦିଷ୍ଟ ପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ପାଇଁ ଉଦ୍ଦିଷ୍ଟ ହେଇଛି ପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ୱାଜ୍ ଭିଜିଟିଂ ହିମ୍ and helping him also. ଏଇଟା ସହଦେବଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ହେଇଛି ସହଦେବ was supplying milk in the ashram in Pondicherry. I hope Ananta Babu is listening to me. Are you there, Ananta Babu? Ananta Babu, are you there? Are
Yes,
you
yes, he
there?
is there. I
Okay.
don't know. He's listening. He's there in
So,
meeting.
so one day I was very hungry. I came from the sports ground in Pondicherry. My mother was staying in Odia Nilayam. And I said, Bow mute ti khaibi, mate bhoko korche. E chudata mate delu. Pokole to ପାଇଁ ଏଇଟା ଚୂଡ଼ା ନୁହଁ ମୁଁ ତ ପୁଅ କାହିଁ ଚୂଡ଼ା ଦିଆଯାଇ ପାରିବନି ନା ଆଉ ଜଣେ ପୁଅଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ଅଛି ସେ କିଏ ପିଏ ପୁଅ ସହଦେବ ପାଇଁ ଅଛି କାରଣ ମୁଁ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଚୂଡ଼ା ଚକୁଟିଥିଲି ମୁଁ ସହଦେବ କଥା ଚିନ୍ତା କରୁଥିଲି ସହଦେବଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ଏଇଟା ଉଦ୍ଦିଷ୍ଟ ହେଇଛି, ଏଇଟା ତୋ ପାଇଁ ନୁହଁ। I mean, I am really struck the way most of the people, men and women, are attached to their own family, their own sons and daughters. They might talk about, other children, but they do not have this kind of a Biswa Chetana that I have seen with my mother. Truly, denying food to your own son because somebody had really, I mean, the mother had thought of somebody else at the time of preparation of the food. That's incredible, unbelievable in human terms. Another day, I've heard when we were in Pondicherry, there was a office staff who came to transcribe some poems. And after the transcription was over, my father said to the servant and said, go to the market building and get some, some eatables like boda, dosa, and etc. You go and bring. So my mother just told my father, can you just listen to me? Can you? He didn't want to really embarrass him in public. It is Suni Pavitru. So she called him inside. Say, why are you giving this bazaar food to this man? Has he done some harm to you? You have got Saja Pokala. And this food from the outside is so bad, unhygienic. And you know what kind of oil it is fried. He has done a favor to you, to us, and you want to spoil his stomach. So why don't you give him some homemade food? I scolded my father. Look at the concern, and we are talking about terms like humanism, but very often we don't realize the significance of what humanism is all about. ତମେ ତ ମଣିଷ, ଆମେ ତ ମଣିଷ ଭାଇ, ରିକ୍ସାବାଲା ହଉ କି ଯାହା ବି ହଉ, ବେଳାସେ କବି, ଯାହା ବି ଭାବିଛନ୍ତି, whatever she has thought, she's really practiced it. One day, she went to the integral school there, where Chittabai was also teaching, and before that. She came to know that the children are not giving proper food. At lunchtime, all these Oppa and Bhai, the mistresses and the teachers used to go home for having their lunch. She came to know. She had a broken health at that time. She just insisted with my father and the school authority. She said, she will go and then prepare food for the children. Why should the children be denied food? Why are the teachers going away at recess time and leaving the children unfed? So this is again, you can see that she said that whatever the mother and the divine are saying, whatever we are reading in the book, we should really practice. She wanted to go and stay. This is something unknown which is not known to most people. I'm sharing it for the first time, since she wanted to know about the personal side. Because for her, the personal and the literary were not separate. The personal and the literary were interconnected, intertwined. So she wrote a letter to mother. I want to stay in the ashram. My children are there. So obviously there was a question of the future of my father also. My father was very devoted, and my parents also had a very close relationship. My mother's idea was that if I stay in the ashram, my father would be also automatically made to come, because he would come also. But the question is that who would really ensure the livelihood? Because he was in service and children had to be also fed. Also, although many children were taken care of directly by the mother, but my father believed that, we should not really leave it entirely them, because, at least some kind of fees were paid. At that time, it's just 100 rupees. But then my father was not earning a big salary at that time. So it was written to the mother. So mother said, you make your own home and ashram in Bhubaneswar. So she said, yes, we must have this dining room practice. At 7:30, there should be a bell. So the bell is rung and everybody has to come and eat. The parents, the children, the servant, everybody will sit together. And there will be no second helping. Incredible. There will be no second helping. And no separate food for parents, sons and the husbands and all that. Kiye puri khailani, kiye roti khailani, kiye paratha khailani. A whole time was spent by the mothers, by the women in the house, till lunchtime itself. Lunchtime again, another preparation. So she said, no, there has to be a discipline. Mother is talking about discipline. Everybody will eat together, including the servant. Servant will not have separate food. Servant, the parent, the father, the mother, the children, everybody will have. And guess what? There will be no second helping. Dithora kahaku diyajibo nai. Kain diyajibo nai? ମୁଁ ମା ହିସାବରେ ଜାଣିଛି କିଏ କ'ଣ ଖାଇବ। ସେକେଣ୍ଡ ଟାଇମ୍ କାହିଁକି ଦିଆଯିବ? ଡାଇନିଂ ହଲ୍ରେ ତ ସେକେଣ୍ଡ ଟାଇମ୍ ଦିଆଯାଉନି। ଯାହା ତୁମକୁ ଦିଆଗଲା ସେତିକି ତୁମେ ଖାଇବ, ଯେତିକି ତୁମ ଦରକାର ଖାଇବ, and no wastage also. Look at the manner in which she lived and the manner in which she created poetry. And when I came home and said, Ma, bohu, mane gote kavita padha hochi, kavita. So what is the meaning? So she said, I have not really I have not written the poem thinking of the meaning in mind. The poem should really speak for itself. Does it mean that she did not have the kind of a background? Somebody asked this question, what was the reading? And this is so very important. This Randirji, you asked this question. What was the reading? Did she have any kind of a reading? Yes. She read all the major Odia texts also before her own time. She read Gangadhar Meher. She read Radhanath. She read many others also. She read Kuntala Kumari. And she also read Bengali literature. She read Rabindranath. She read Sharad Chandra. She read Bankim Chandra. In other words, she read whatever she could have access to. Her brother, Birokishore Das, used to buy some books and give her. Then, like, N.C. Das, the father used to give so many books to her. She read. It is not that she's an unlettered genius. She read. She read widely, in depth also. And if you look at her notebooks, which happen to be with me, and one day with your own kind of a permission, I would like to really show some of those scripts also to you. And many of the notebooks are in Odisha. I'm in Shimla now. So you can see the kind of a writing, the effort that she has made about prosody, for example. So she's reading widely, and she had not read English, but later on she had asked, there are also episodes when she would be asking the brother-in-law of Manoj Das, Bisambara Samanto, you please come and then I will prepare some food for you in the Odia Nila. Will you read out the sonnets of Sri Aurobindo? You read out Savitri. So I would ask, then how do you understand Savitri? I said, yes, I understand Savitri. When I close my eyes and listen to the words, they're mantric words, I can understand Savitri also. So it's not communication of the verbal kind, but the communication of the intuitive kind. And that is exactly what the mother says in order to understand Sri Aurobindo's words, which have a mantric power. So it's not verbal, semantic, lexical communication. It is a non-verbal communication. As a poet that she could have access to it, obviously, she had. And she's written a poem about Usha Nagari. She was there at the time of the inauguration of Auroville in 1968. So you can see that she had access to the world out there, the modern world, but she had not really imitated anything. I don't know what would have been the result if she had read T.S. Eliot's Wasteland, as Guru Prasad Mohanty did. Because Bidyut Prabha Devi, Guru Prasad Mohanty, Mahapatra Nirmal, all of them wrote in Kumkum, the journal. But regrettably, my mother did not have a higher education. I think there would have been a kind of a fulfillment. There need not have been any kind of an imitation of modern poetry, but it would have been interesting to see the result when she had read those. She had read mostly traditional texts and a couple of books. Later on, when she goes to Pondicherry, she happened to read much of the work of Sri Aurobindo, and which were read out, and many of the works were also sort of brought out. Synthesis of Yoga, Dibya Jibon in Odia, etc. They were brought out, and she had read this also. And another person who had greatly inspired, apart from Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, etc., and Tagore, was Babaji Ramakrishna Das. Now he was a seeker, traditional Ram Bhakt who came from Ayodhya, and he had written Jibani, Bhagavad Jibani, Jibani of devotees. So my mother said, you have been selected to go to Pondicherry. You should read this book, The Life of Devotees, that he had written, Ramakrishna Das. So we read The Life of Devotees. My mother was very, very keen, and she believed in prenatal education that many psychologists are accepting now. That the education of the children begin before the birth of the child itself. That you must aspire for aesthetic life. You must aspire for noble goals. And you must really read great, noble texts. So she used to read Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. So this is narrated by my father also. That before the birth of the child, by Minoti, your namesake, my elder sister who lives in the Pondicherry, She was born, before she was born, she was the first child. So her mother read. She said, no, I must remain in a peaceful state. I must read the works of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. I must read the writings of great souls, the spiritual minded, the beings when I have a child in me. And she believed that, the child will really imbibe that kind of a consciousness. So this is something which is stated now, prenatal education. So you can see that she was far ahead of her times. This is what Manoj Das told me. Bidyut Prabha was far ahead of her times. The question that Ananta Babu asked, Dr. Ananta Giri asked her, so how did she deal with, she was a strong woman, how did she deal? Well, she was not really interested in creating a controversy, but she believed in, standing for her own values and her own gestures. When she decided to put the children there were many critics also, skeptics. What will happen to the future of the children? So she said that I have thought of the best place. She was not interested in a missionary education, the convent schools. She always was looking for an education which had Indian tradition and Western values also, Western exposure. That she found in the Pondicherry ashram, Sri Aurobindo ashram, swimming, gymnastics, athletics, foreign languages, but at the same time Vedas, Upanishads, etc. So as Romarola and Dr. Anantagiri also alluded to Romarola, and Romarola had famously said that Sri Aurobindo is the greatest synthesis between the East and the West. So Eastern tradition and Western exposure, Western values. So a synthetic kind of an experiment which Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education presented. And so she made a recce, and then she visited Ramnath Panda in Koraput, and then she came to know that children were already there. Their children were already, their son was already there. So she applied to the mother on the basis of photographs. The mother is to give admission. So that is how my sister Minoti and myself, Papa and myself, we got admitted, and the other children, Brahmanand and Pranati, got admitted also. So she did not have this kind of attachment, blind attachment, emotional attachment. She thought that the children should be brought up in a certain manner, and certain kind of a discipline and austerity and detachment is also required as parents. So blind love, spoiling the children, she never believed in. She thought that they should be really brought up in a very good atmosphere, spiritual atmosphere, with discipline and austerity and with noble values, as Sri Aurobindo writes. And this is a quotation that is there in the notebooks that we all had. Children should be brought up to be frank, honorably upright human beings ready to grow into divine nature. That is there. That message is there on top of each of the notebooks that used to use. Sri Aurobindo's message, children should be brought up to be frank, upright, noble human beings ready to grow into divine nature. She believed when she went to Pondicherry for the first time, 1950s, 60s, she said that she found her place for the children and for herself also. The kind of philosophy that Sri Aurobindo believed in, how not to renounce life, but to how embrace life. And this life itself is very important. And certainly not segregation of the same sexes. But there has to be a kind of an inborn purity when we deal with men and women together. So the lower self, the lower passionate, passional self and the sexual self has to be really controlled and sublimated, as Sri Aurobindo says in the collection called Desire Life, Desire, Food and Sex, that section in the letters on the yoga that she's talking about and that Sri Aurobindo is talking about. So she has read everything in Odia and English, and she tried to really practice it in very strictly in her own life itself. Did she have remorse about anything, about life, about the caste? She was not a believer in caste. Although she was born into the Karan fold, she was not a believer in caste. I recall she had told me once that in the house of Dr. Karan Singh, he was a very a Sikh gentleman, Sardar Amar Singh, and he was also a proponent of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy and yoga. His daughter Usha got married to a Patnaik's family, and they were all together. And all the women were gossiping in that room. So my mother said, she narrated this to me. Why are you gossiping? A boy and a girl, they've got married. So you should celebrate. Why are you talking about Sikhism and Oriya and Patnaik, etc.? She was above that. I had heard in the villages in Kwasmodia and Agarpada, she said, तो ବୋଉ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆସୁଥିଲେ ସବୁ ଗାଁରେ ସବୁ ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କୁ ଯାଇକି ଦେଖା କରୁଥିଲେ. One section of our own village also had, the Dalit families, SC families, scheduled caste families. He said, ଏପଟରୁ ସେପଟ ତ ବୋଉ ଯାଉଥିଲେ, ଯାହାର କିଛି ଦରକାର ଥିଲା, ଚେରିମୁଳି ଯାହା ବି ହଉ, ସେ ଯାଇକି ତାଙ୍କୁ ବିତରଣ କରୁଥିଲେ. So truly she was not, she had this kind of a world, Vishwa consciousness, the world consciousness she had, Vishwa Chetana. She never had a discriminatory view. She might have been born, but she never had a regret that, of course, she gave her a word to her father because, those were the times and the context. He said, I will not go, I promise you, because she had received so much from her father also. Other children were there, son was there. But my grandfather, N.C. Das, was the closest to my mother. And my mother was the closest to her father. Of course, the mother was the Rekha Devi, but she was very close as a writer because my grandfather had, established a Rekha publishing house named after his wife. And he was a compiler. And his words had foreword from Suniti Kumar Chatterjee and others also. And he used to sell the books of my mother also. And Pratibha Rai recalled that Parsuram Das was the headmaster of Balikudas High School, and my grandfather used to go and stay in his house when she was distributing and selling copies of the books. And one day, Parsuram Das told Pratibha Rai, who was very young at that time, that to Sunichu, see Bidyut Prabha Devi Bapa, because my mother had become a famous writer before her marriage itself. See Bidyut Prabha Bapa. And how the father is a mentor and is helping through Radhana Mohan Gadnaik, through Krishna Kara and Krishna Chandra Kara, and then Godavaris Mahapatra, Godavaris Mishra, and others also. And the question that Dr. Giri asked also, let me come back to that question. What was her relationship with the contemporary writers? How did she deal with the progressive movement? ସବୁଜ କବିର ଥିଲେ କିନ୍ତୁ ଯେଉଁମାନେ ପରବର୍ତ୍ତୀ ସମୟରେ ଆସିଲେ, Marxist influence. See, one thing, Dr. Giri, I want to tell you. I mean, when I have really read those accounts directly from my mother and others also during that period, there was no antagonism between the Sabuja and the realistic school, the progressive school. There was no antagonism. To our house, when I was there, my father has said, who were the people who were visiting the house? Many of them belonged to this kind of the school, progressive school. Ananta Patnaik, who was a leading member of the progressive school later on, used to come because he was, editor of Sisulekha, the poetry journal of the government of Odisha. So Bapa କହୁଥିଲେ ଯେ ସେ ଆସିକି ଲେଖା ନଉଥିଲେ ବିଦ୍ୟୁତ ପ୍ରାଙ୍କୁ ଡକା ନଉଥିଲେ. One day, towards the end, Sachi Rautrai, who is a leading exponent of the practitioner of the progressive school, Sachi Rautrai, later period, towards the end, in the 80s, mid-80s, when, Utkal Sahitya Samaj, there was a meeting, I went and sat down. And then he came to know, Sachi Rautrai, that I was sitting there in the audience. So he called me. So I went there. He said, Tome Bidyut Prabha puo. And I saw so much of affection, so much of admiration in Sachi Rautrai. So much of admiration and affection from Ananta Patnaik. So much of admiration from Nandini Satpathy, of a different school altogether. But the friendship that they had in those days did not recognize these ideological barriers. I think my mother was very, very fond of these people, all of them. And in her own way, she was writing poetry, which would be very similar to the kind of values that the progressive were really expounding in their own way. In Pondicherry, when Nandini Satpathy visited, and my mother was there, in Udayanilayam, I know that both of them went and sat on the bench on the beach and talked for hours about Revencha Girls' School, and there are other experiences also. So I think there was so much of intermingling, so much of friendship among people. And that overcame all the rigid barriers. And we find so much of ideological barriers now. But I find that there were no barriers because I think there was a mutual understanding, mutual appreciation. And nobody tried to put down anybody else. So no remorse at all. As people were asking, was there any remorse? So what was the dynamic of a communication? Yes, this was the dynamics of communication because it transcended the kind of a barriers that we typically think of. Okay. And this is, and I have also already covered how she was a strong person and she dealt with the world. I've given examples from our own personal life and about how she impacted my life as a student. Of course, I mean, I did not have so much of idea. I knew that my mother was a great poet, but sadly, the the time at that time for the during that time, I think there was less media, less public information. So generally, people knew that she was a very well-known poet, accomplished poet. But we have never had. I mean, she was, of course, after the passing of the grandfather, her father. She went once or twice to the radio station, and then Basanti Madam has quoted about the singer and the singi. That's it about patriarchy. What would happen if, for example, if a lion were to ride, and the man would be below, and the lion will be sitting on top. So she has written about that patriarchy, about domination. She did not believe in either male domination or the female domination. She believed in equality that the mother had talked about, and to outgrow the ego that if you find. So, Chittavais I have covered. Randit's, Mr. Randit's, what kind of literature she had read, I have covered. And how did she, what kind of a thing she drew from tradition and what was her understanding of tradition? Well, all that is really useful and empowering is to be accepted. Sati Pratha is bad, is to be rejected. Domination by men is to be rejected. And woman as a perpetual cook, for example, at home is to be rejected. So she prepares food, but she's not tied down to the kitchen. So therefore, Pratigat. So my uncle would come and she said, "Mu ghar ko asle mu janichi nuavo avthare mo pai rosei karibe nai." So I would eat out and then come because after 9 o'clock there will be no fire. There will be no cooking at all after 9 o'clock. By 9 o'clock, the food will be served and it's over. Anybody who comes will have to eat outside. So is one going to be really popular? Even today, if you ask, Basanti Madam and others also, very often, I mean, we're helpless. Somebody comes because there'll be criticism, there'll be gossiping. What time are you coming? Why should you come at about 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon where everything is over and you expect the housewife should go once again prepare food? So, this whole superstition and rituals which really cripple a woman. So she was a great radical from that point of view. And she spoke out and she lived that kind of a life. She did not live a life of duplicity. She did not make declarations which she was not really implementing in life. So that is something incredible. Today, when you're talking personal is the personal is the political. I don't think we realize the value of this, the significance of this kind of a precept. The significance is that there should be no duality. There should be no duplicity between the person and the political. If you say that, woman should not really be tied down to the kitchen all the time, we should really practice it. And people who come there also should not expect. Just because they are relatives, they should come and once again food will be prepared and served. Odd time, at night also. It could be 9:30, 10:30 at night, but then you are forced to because otherwise there will be a lot of criticism, a lot of gossiping in the family circles. So she was in brief, I would say, she was a very authentic kind of a person. She was a very genuine person. So Kuntala Kumari was a very genuine person, an authentic person. Sarala Devi was also an authentic person. And we should read Sarala Devi's Nari Hridabi when she's talking about marital rape. My mother was greatly influenced because Sarala Devi's family and my aunt's family, for example, and my brothers and somebody who was a sister-in-law, my mother's sister-in-law's family, they came from the same Jamidari background of Jagat Singhpur. So Sarla Devi used to come to our grandfather's house also to learn English, because my grandfather was a great compiler, and he's also written Brukyalata, Sarva Purana Sara, Gitare Ingraji Sikhya. We learned Gitare Ingraji Sikhya because children in the rural areas used to have a great desire. So he had prepared this book, Gitare Ingraji Sikhya. Father, mother, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, son, daughter. You see, I remember those lines also. So you see that English is not to be rejected, English is to be mastered, but it is important to really learn your own mother tongue. So when we got a chance to go to Pondicherry, I remember my mothers told us, both me and my sister, you are going to Pondicherry, you will learn many foreign languages, because we had French also as a mother of, as the medium of instruction. We had English also. ତମ ମାତୃଭାଷା ତମେ ଭୁଲିବ ନାହିଁ. She told us she had studied up to class 9. Today we are talking about mother tongue education. She said, "ତମେ ପଢ଼ାଅ ଇଂରେଜୀ ଫ୍ରେଞ୍ଚ ପଢ଼ିବ କି ତମ ମାତୃଭାଷା ତମେ ଭୁଲିବ ନାହିଁ." She had told us, I remember. And when we went and stayed in Odisha boarding, which was called Home of Progress, which was created by the mother, so we had guardians like Manoj Das and Pratigyan Devi. And she told both of us in 1966, she said, "ଆଜିଠୁ ସେମାନେ ତୁମର ବାପା ମା. ତମେ ଆମ କଥା ବେଶୀ ଭାବିବ ନାହିଁ. ଆମେ ଓଡ଼ିଶାରେ ଅଛୁ." So truly, Manoj Das and Pratigyan Devi became parents for us. We have stayed for about 8 years. We were there with them. Pratigyan Devi was like a foster mother for us, and foster father was, Manoj Das. We have seen them from close quarters, and the enormous amount of care that they took, and the way they gave us their affection and love and discipline also. It's incredible. I have spent 8 years with Manoj Das. And I'm very grateful to Vishwanidam for inviting me to speak about Manoj Das, because I have seen these people and the other realized souls. Nirod Baran, who was the scribe of Sri Aurobindo for, of Savitri, he has taught me. Temi Ben, who was very close to the mother, and written poetry under the inspiration of Sri Aurobindo, has taught me. Then Amal Kiran, K.D. Setna, who was the Manasaputra of Sri Aurobindo, as he is popularly known, he has also been of a great influence. M.P. Pandit also. So you see this life transforming experience that I have had and my generation had in the ashram. My mother also had that. And the greatness of my father was that he always respected Bidyut Prabha. He never said, I have never heard my father, addressing my mother as tu koilu, tu etike asilu. Never. Bidyut Prabha kohile, Bidyut Prabha gole. And in Jatri, the memoir that he has written, he said, Bidyut Prabha kohile pilangu neiki chadiba pai. In how many families can you have this kind of respect that the husband have? And Bidyut Prabha pai se cover tiyari kole. The covers of the book, he says that I went to Kaligoli and Bimbadara Burma was there and he was in great poverty. My father says, this is exactly what has happened. I met a great artist like Bimbadara Burma and he's suffering from poverty. And he was so shocked and he's written about it. But Bimbadara Burma gute anki dele. Bidyut Prabha boy Bandhanika pai gute anki dele. So you see the artist, that he went in search of the artist. My mother said, this is the kind of a cover, the painting that I need. So my father would go. So he's helped so much. So when you think of Sadhu Charan Rai and Reba Rai, we really think of Panchanan Mohanty and Bidyut Prabha Devi. My mother really grew and blossomed and flowered because she had a companionship with my father, Panchanan Mohanty. So modest, so respectful, that whatever she says, because she's far advanced. And if you are thinking of worldly calculation, it is something which can overcome that. She said, don't worry about the future because mother is really here to take care of us. And as Sri Aurobindo says, always behave as if the mother is, looking at you, because she is indeed always present. So the respect that Sri Aurobindo gave to the mother, and the respect, the reverence which the mother gave to Sri Aurobindo, and encouraged everybody to follow, that he's not just a kind of he's truly an avatar. Mother said he's truly an avatar. So when Bidyut Prabha and a few others also approached the mother and Sri Aurobindo. They truly understood the significance. So to understand Bidyut Prabha, you have to think of Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, and the mother, and the entire spiritual tradition that she believed in. But along with that, she also was deeply attracted to the best that modernity can offer. So modern languages, foreign languages, swimming, gymnastics, athletics, all those are also very important. So did not believe in sannyas of the traditional kind, did not believe in renunciation of life, did not believe in individual salvation. Salvation, individual salvation, yes, but with the totality of the community itself. The community cannot be really given up. And it is on the basis of the example that Sri Aurobindo said is very important to set an example. So my mother always believed that more than precept and homilies, it is of great and paramount importance to set an example. It doesn't matter whether other people are going to follow you or not. When she started this kind of asana camp, my father has written, by 1971 or 71 or so, from 50 people who used to attend in Sardar Patel Hall Integral School, he said, so kami ki gote dina dekha gala, mu au Bidyut Prabha mein thilu. Other people had not even come. So, I mean, so people get tired, they get interested in sensational things. But to go day after day for asanas, it requires a discipline and austerity of a kind. ମୋ ବାପା ଲେଖିଛନ୍ତି ଗୋଟେ ବହିରେ, ତାଙ୍କ ଡାଏରୀରେ, ତାଙ୍କ ଯେଉଁଟା ଥିଲା ସେଟା ସେ ଯାତ୍ରୀ ବହିରେ ଲେଖିଛନ୍ତି। କେତେଜଣ ଆସିଲେ, ଧୀରେ ଧୀରେ କମିଗଲେ, ଆଉ ଗୋଟେ ଦିନ ଦେଖାଗଲା ଖାଲି ବିଦ୍ୟୁତ ବାପା ଆଉ ମୁଁ ସେଠି ଉପସ୍ଥିତ ଥିଲୁ ଆସନ କରିବା ପାଇଁ। ଆପଣମାନେ ଭାବନ୍ତୁ, ଆମେ ଗୋଟେ ଆଜି ଟକ୍ କରୁଛୁ, ତା ଭିତରେ ଆମେ ଯଦି କିଛି ଗୋଟେ ଜେନୁଇନନେସ୍ ଆମେ ଆବିଷ୍କାର କରିବା, ଏ ଟକ୍ର ଗୋଟେ ତାତ୍ପର୍ଯ୍ୟ ହେବ। ଏ ଟକ୍ର ତାତ୍ପର୍ଯ୍ୟ ନୁହେଁ କାହାର ଗୋଟେ ପୋଏଟ୍ରି ପଢ଼ିବା, କାହାର ଲିଟରେଚର ପଢ଼ିବା, କ'ଣ ଲିଟରେଚର ଥିଲା, କ'ଣ ଟ୍ରେଡିସନ୍ ଥିଲା, କି ପରିବର୍ତ୍ତନ ଜୀବନଟା କେମିତି ପରିବର୍ତ୍ତନ ହେବ, ସେ କଥା ସେ ଭାବୁଥିଲେ। So if we forget everything else and we remember how poetry and literature can be an instrument for transforming our own life, as it happened in the case of Bidyut Prabha, would be closer to the goal that we have in mind. So I am really very, very grateful because Biswanidam, the world in our nest, that image, that metaphor really appeals to me. And when I am talking about many universes, I was talking about Tagore also, because she also believed in Biswa Chetana, Biswa Sahitya. So my mother was very interested in everything universal, nothing parochial, nothing regional. The local is to be accepted, and you have to be grounded in the local tradition, local languages, and local cultures. But you have to also sort of have linkages with the broader universal self. And there are many universals there, many universes, not one. The regional, the national, the international, the global. Similarly, modernity and tradition have to go together. The best of modernity, best of tradition. So no binaries. Inclusivity that we are talking about today. Thank you very much. I believe I have covered most of the comments and the questions that people have raised. Very deeply grateful to them and grateful to the coordinator also for conducting this program. If there is anything else, and in terms of an epilogue, I will be happy to hear. I hope I have conveyed my own responses to the comments and the questions.